If you decide you have a question or something, unmute yourself, or you can interrupt me if I don't notice that you've unmuted yourself. Today we will be doing a little bit of singing informally, and so it's important that we're all muted because you want to hear yourself and you want to hear me, but if we all hear each other, it'll be very confusing while we do that. Okay, here we go. So just a little review from last week. We talked about hearing the elements of music. So hearing pitch, hearing rhythm, and as we can hear things, improvising with that. If you can see the screen with the written material on it, will you nod your head? Thank you very much. So your assignment last week was to sing up and down this little scale here. So what I'm going to do is kind of start you from one end, and I'm going to sing little patterns, okay? And you're going to repeat them back to me, okay? Can we do that? Doesn't have to be pretty or anything, just try and make it in tune. So I'm picking a do out of nowhere. Here it feels like do. My room kind of rings in this key, so here's do. Repeat after me. Do, re, do. Do, re, mi, re, do. Do, do, do. Do, ti, do. Do, ti, la, ti, do. Do, re, do. Do, re, do. All right, I can see you all. I can see a few perplexed faces, but you clearly know how to work up and down this scale here. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today, which is written pitch. So what you were working with in a simplistic way was how to read on a musical staff pitch. So notes in terms of high and low. Notice that we're not talking quite yet about duration. Notes don't just have pitch in terms of highness and lowness, but they have duration in terms of length. But as it says here, when written on a staff, a note indicates a pitch and a rhythmic value. The notation consists of a note head, so this part of the note here, either empty or filled in. This one's empty, this one's filled in. And optionally can include a stem, a beam, a dot, or a flag. This is a little flag. A beam connects two of these notes together so that your eye can tell that this divides one note into two. Okay. And then a dot goes over here to the end. A dot adds value to the length of the note. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. But notes can't convey their pitch information without being placed on a staff. A staff consists of 5 horizontal lines, evenly spaced. The plural of staff is staves, but not staves. Staves, spelled with a V when it's plural, 2 Fs when it's singular. But staves still can't convey their pitch information if the staff doesn't include a clef. A clef indicates which pitches are assigned to the lines and spaces on a staff. The two most commonly used clefs are the treble and bass clef. Others that you'll see relatively infrequently are the alto and tenor clef. The treble clef, or the G clef, is so named because the symbol is a stylized letter G that encircles the line of the staff. I always teach this. That treble clef has never in my entire life looked like the letter G, but in case it looks like a G to you, I just continue to teach that. That's an old-fashioned way of teaching it, but it's how I was taught, so there it is. Indicating where the G above middle C is located. So when I teach my high schoolers this thing, I literally use this language. If you can see my notation program here with the little scale, nod your head. I tell them, look, you know it's the G clef because this little circle-y do thing is around the second line, and that tells you that the line is G. So even if you don't know what all these other notes are, you can always determine what G is. It's where this little cross happens, right there. Let's get a little closer. Where this little cross happens on this clef is G. Now that only matters when you need to know where do is, or in order to find what key you're in or figure out what note you need to play on the piano. But when you, in terms of reading and solfege and determining pitch based on your ear, it's not important to know what G sounds like. But if you want to be able to identify other things on this staff, this is a great way to begin. The bass clef is called an F clef because these two little dots next to the clef here surround the line that is F. So the treble we call the G clef, the bass clef we call the F clef. Now when you put those two staffs together, it forms a continuum. The grand staff consists of two staffs, so two sets of 5 lines, one that uses a treble clef, one that uses a bass clef. And the staves are connected by a curly brace. This one is curiously lacking that, but usually there's a little curly brace there. Looks like one of those fancy parentheses. The middle C on the grand staff corresponds to the middle C on the piano, and is also the first ledger line above the bass staff and the first ledger line below the treble staff. So as you can see here, this middle note that is middle C is the same in both staffs that connect there. So if you're a soprano or an alto and you're singing here and your vocal part goes many ledger lines below the treble staff, treble clef on the staff, you're suddenly singing in bass clef. It's good to know because sometimes the basses and the tenors sing high enough to be up on the treble staff, and they intersect and they cross voice and they're all together here. And in fact, alto and tenor parts do that all the time because the composer's trying to vary tone color in this middle part of the tonal spectrum. Eric Whitaker does that constantly, and double voicing and cross voicing here in the middle in order to make fun tone colors. So, you know, I can't sing a low C, but you can hear the continuum here. If I go do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, re, mi. And it goes up and goes all the way down, past where you can hear low and past where you can hear high. And so these staves plot out these pitches in that way. Make sense so far? Nod your head. Yeah, it's actually not too complicated, but it gets complicated as we try to read music, right? So here I've transcribed the scale that we worked on the other page. Let's sing this together. Just all the way up and all the way back down. Here's do, 2, ready? And do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Notice these closed note heads don't include any stems or beams or flags to indicate their duration because we're not talking about duration yet. We're just talking about pitch going up and down like that. So here, let me write you a brief little melody that we can sight read together. So this is do. Sing with me very slowly. Ready? And do, re, mi, re, do, ti, do. How many of you had absolutely no problem with that? How many of you are like, oh my gosh, what? Yeah. So the trick is, if you're singing with me, my do may be too low or maybe too high for you. But when you're singing on your own, you can start on whatever do you want, whichever one feels comfortable, and sing what you see. So what I'm going to send you this week are several of these little figurations like this so that you can practice going with them. Now, what this notation program does when I put the solfege in, oops, is writes the solfege syllables down below, like where you'd find words in a score. You do not want to write solfege down here. What you want to do is you want to write it right up here. It's not even going to let me do what I'd like to do. But you want to write it right up here next to the note head so that your eye can practice following these notes up and down. Does that make sense? So when you're using solfege in real life, which you should as much as you can in order to continuously apply this new skill you have, write this solfege in right next to the note small so that you can get used to watching these notes go up and down the staff. If you do this right here, you'll be reading these notations and you're not reading this notation. This can mean the difference between you making a week of progress and not making a week of any progress reading notation if you write the solfege down here. Understand that? Very important. Now let's talk about keys and things like that. One thing that happens when we start learning to read music is I say, okay, this piece is in the key of, there's a dialog box somewhere and I've lost it. There we go. This key is in the key of G. You're like, bro, I have no idea what notes are in the key of G. Okay, and you'll see this key signature change and all these things happen and you're like, what even does that mean? Well, don't worry too hard about it. It just means that where the do is different. So if you see one sharp here, that indicates the key of G major. So if I write a G major scale on here, you don't have to worry your heart about anything other than singing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, just like you did before. So here's do, let's sing a G major scale and go. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Understand? What you sing in solfege really does not change based on the key change. Except, of course, if I were to walk over to the piano and grab a G, we would sing it in a different, starting on a different pitch that we can hear. But the syllables and the relationships between these notes do not change because the key changes. Do is always do. Do always relates to re and to mi and fa, sol, la, ti the same way, no matter what key it's in. For instance, if I sing in this key, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do, and then I go up a half step, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do, and up a half step, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do. Now, all of this becomes more complicated when you start talking about singing in minor keys, okay? So we're gonna leave this key signature here. If this line here is do, someone tell me what solfege syllable is this first note? So you know that this note here is G, which would be do. You can count down, do, this line, T is this space, La is here. So do, ti, la. La, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la. A minor scale is just the same major scale we've already sung starting on La, because the minor scale is a mode of this collection of pitches. A mode is the way things work. Okay, so if I sing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la. Your ear heard a little chord change, didn't it? Yeah, because the center of gravity, which we call tonality, shifted from do to la. But if you want to sing minor scales, then just start on la. So everyone pick a do when you're practicing and go to la. So here's my do, do, ti, la. Here's the beginning of my minor scale. La, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la. Does everyone agree that you hear a minor scale? Then, if you want to make minor scales kind of sound like the way they sound like in a lot of music we sing, we're going to raise the so to si. So do, ti, la, la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, si, la, si, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la. So without raising it, it's so. La, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la. If I do raise it, it becomes si. La, ti, do, re, mi, fa, si, la, si, fa, mi, re, do, ti, la. What do you think so far?
I have a question.
Yes, Robin.
What did the raising the so to si do again? I didn't quite catch it.
So whenever you see a sharp on a note,
Okay.
it raises that note by a half step.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And
okay. So it
the
wasn't significant.
solfege, right.
Okay.
The solfege syllable for that note is so, but when we raise it by a half step, it becomes si.
Gotcha. So it's any sharp. It's not just specific to that. I thought you were showing us a
Yes.
different kind of scale. Okay.
Oh, no, yeah. So
Okay.
any note that is raised has a different solfege syllable, but the one we encounter most of all is this raised so, which goes to si.
Okay.
Another one we see a lot of is the raised fa, which is fi. So if I want to sing a C major scale, for instance, with a raised fourth, here's a C major scale without it. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. But if I want to raise fa to fi, do, re, mi, fi, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fi, mi, re, do. That's a Morton Lauridsen favorite thing right there. You may hear that in a lot of Lauridsen. Do, re, mi, fi, sol, la, ti, do. You could even lower. I'm just showing you the possibilities here. You don't have to try and remember this. Do, re, mi, fi, sol, la, te, do, te, la, sol, fi, mi, re, do. That's a very interesting mode, very interesting scale by raising and lowering things. So notes can be raised and lowered, but the most important thing I want you to do is get really facile with this, with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's just the diatonic scale of solfege. One way I like to work on that with students that are new to this is we play this little game where we go do, do, re, do, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. You can learn to sing up and down this scale by doing what we call an additive scale. So you're starting with the first note, you're adding this one and going back, you're adding this one and going back, you're adding that one and going back. Then you can start at the top. Do, do, ti, do, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, la, ti, do. And once you become comfortable doing these additive scales from both directions, there's almost nothing that can be thrown at you that would throw you off. Because once you know your scales and arpeggios, there's really nothing else to this kind of music, is there? Do you know the song from Aristocats? Do, mi, so, do, so, mi, do, re. We should learn our scales and our arpeggios.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, it's a classic. Joe, do you have a question?
No, I just love that scales and arpeggio song.
Yeah, it's a good song. The thing about this, though, is that it takes a while to get really good at this. And lots of things can happen as you practice. Number one, you get off and you start singing the wrong solfege syllables. That happens to literally everyone. So you just sing mla, 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 mla until you figure out where you are in the solfege and you hop back on the train again. You can also start singing wrong notes, but if you're singing the right syllables and singing the wrong notes, you're still practicing well, because you want both of those skills to grow. In fact, if you find that you are singing the right solfege syllables and you're singing wrong pitches or you're singing out of tune, that is an excellent indicator as to what we need to work on, what you need to work on. And the opposite is true too. If you hear these notes and you can sing it, but you're singing the wrong solfege syllables, then it's not that you can't hear it, it's that you need to get better at solfege. The problem that happens so often is that folks get into the middle of this and it gets hard and they say, well, it doesn't really matter that I'm not really good at solfege because I can hear it and I sing in tune. So I know that method, whatever. But the problem with that is that if you aren't really doing well with solfege at this basic level of just singing the major scale and the minor scale up and down and modes, when you start encountering chromaticism and raised and lowered tones and weird harmonies and all kinds of strange things that happen in the wild, in our music, you won't be able to identify what those are consistently. And building on these skills will allow you to hear things you did not hear before. But of course, you can't possibly know that you couldn't hear it before until you work on these skills, right? That's the frustrating thing about it. So whatever you do, don't give up. So what I'm going to send you is a one-page sheet of little melodies and little quips of melodies. And what I'd like you to do is write the solfege in. Okay, so they'll all be in the people's key of C, so you're not having to find any weird keys. They'll all be in the key of C. Write the solfege in, okay, right next to the note head, like I told you, and then practice singing them. And they're all going to start on Do this week, so you're always going to know where you're coming from and going to. They're always going to start on Do. But practice writing in that solfege. Basses and tenors, sopranos and altos, I'm going to give you melodies in both clefs, okay? But because we're picking whatever Do we want to sing them, high voice people, you don't have to sing down low in your chest voice, and low voice people, you don't have to sing in your falsetto to sing any of these things. You just have to find Do, pick your Do and sing it. And what I'd love for you to do is pick your favorite before the next class and sing it to me. And I'd love to see how you wrote your solfege in too. Okay, so you have plenty of time to do this. This will be a great way to practice. And then next week, when we start talking about pitch combined with rhythm, I'm going to have some hymns out of the hymnals to send you so that you can see how these pitches and rhythms combine in the wild, right? And from there, we can sort of dissect how to use solfege in real life. So I'm keeping it very, very simple so that you can really get a good footing in these skills before we move on to tougher things. And do take a look at the course schedule for this class, there is I don't think everyone was aware that there is an additional live session for this class where we sort of wrap it all up and tie it all together. July 29th, that's not a Monday night. Okay, the 27th is a Monday night. This is a Wednesday night. And in this conclusion, we take a lot of time and just discuss how all of this combines, and so that you have a really good shot at continuing your study in music theory as we go forward. Give yourself a lot of time, be very patient with yourself. This is not easy if you haven't done this before. If you have done it before, it may be very, very easy for you at this level, but trust me, you know, I can give you some stuff that would stretch your skills for sure. And my teacher took us all the way from reading kind of like this to reading 12-tone atonal music in solfege, with all kinds of weird syllables, moving does around, and it can be very complicated. So there's always more to learn, always more to do, and but take your time learning things in a fundamental way so that you can build skills on top of strong fundamentals, rather than have a little Jenga game with your skills, which is never fun, because they all seem to come toppling down in rehearsal, right? Okay, what are your questions? What are your thoughts about what we've talked about tonight? Sylvia, I see a thought on your face. No thoughts. Barbara.
Please don't make it that hard on us. Let's do the easy stuff first.
Yeah, I threw a little bit more at you tonight just so that you can see what's coming. But what the little examples I'll send you will be very, very simple.
Okay.
Talking 4 or 5 notes each, not long flowing melodies, but just little bitty little things. Because all flowing long melodies are little strings of these little easy units put together, right? So if you learn at this very basic unit, you can string a few of them together. But you got to learn to break them down into those little parts. Betsy?
Yes. So when I was playing around with this week, it just felt, this is just a comment, felt like a different language, because I play piano. And when I see one of these notes, I think the piano key. You know, I think the F sharp, I see the black note, I see the white key, I see the whatever. So it's almost like trying to shut off that part of my brain and begin to just hear and, you know, think about relative pitch and all that. So it's great. It's great learning. It's very difficult for me to do, but I fully see the benefit in doing it. So I'm going to keep at it. Like Barbara, Barbara said, she's going to commit. I'm committing. Yeah.
Yes. I love what you said though about it being about relationships. That is what solfege is about relating tones to each other. You know, do is only do because the rest of the notes relate to it a certain way. And I think most pianists, especially accomplished ones, can hear this and have an innate sense of, you know, tonality and where do is and everything, but singing it as an expression of that knowledge is a whole different thing. You're right. So it might be even harder for you to get started, but I think you'll have an easier time as you go along.
Right. I think
just
so
by
too.
virtue of that experience.
Yeah. And when you look at that C major scale and you look at the notes on paper, they all look like whole steps, but of course they're not. And as you said, you know, the me's and the t's are where the halves begin and all that. So putting all this together is just, it's crazy fun, but really like learning a new language. So.
And it is a language. So when I raised fa to fi, it created a half step between that F sharp and the G. And there is a little bit of a system to that. So we know that T is a half step below do, and we know mi is a half step below fa. So fi is a half step under so.
Right.
It is a bit of a language.
That, yeah, that E to F sharp to a full step, which you're not used to hearing and all. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny.
Yeah. Yep. It is a bit of a language. And if you sing it really fast, it kind of sounds like Pig Latin or something.
Yeah.
So when I took undergraduate conducting, my professor would make us, if we were doing choral music, we had to sing every vocal part on a VHS recording. We'd have to get in front of this camera and we'd have to sing each part by itself on solfege. And then if we had any major instrumental lines, we'd have to sing that on solfege. So when we studied the Brandenburg Concerti, we would have to sing, you know, do, so, mi, fa, so, do, so, mi, fa, so, do, re, do, re, mi, re, do, ti, la, so, do, ti, do, re, mi, re, do, ti, la, so, to prove that we knew what was going on that page. And so take that as a sign that it's possible. And then if idiot undergrads like me and my friends could do it, then all you smart people could certainly do it. Maybe not tomorrow, but maybe next month. You never know.
I don't
Do you all?
I don't think West Virginia tongues move that fast.
Well, sorry. If you have an issue, we can give you an accommodation. Marge.
I'm just having trouble wrapping my head around the basic concept of what solfege is. I understand that it's a relationship between different keys. And I too grew up learning to play piano. And so I think of it in terms of black and white keys and what's presented on a keyboard. But I'm having trouble with the idea of then converting it to what I hear based on relative pitch. Am I totally in the wrong ballpark?
Well, I think we got off on the very first thing you said, which is that solfege is some relationship between keys. It is not. It's a relationship between notes in order to form a key.
But, okay.
And so we're not talking about 12 notes.
Piano keys.
Oh yes, okay. So it's a relationship between those notes.
Okay.
In order to establish key. You know, do is do because fa resolves down to mi and ti resolves up to do. So we know this is do. And you can all tell that we're not suddenly in this key because I go so, do, re, mi, fa, so, ti, do, so, fi, so, la, si, ti, do, right? You can all hear that that's do. And so solfege is just an expression of those notes that make do, do. So as long as you can hear it, continue to hear it. What I don't want anyone to do is throw out any understanding that they have already established. You can use that understanding and bring it to help you as you learn to sing solfege. One thing that I think pianists in the room are going to struggle with is this idea that we're going to pop a do out of nowhere and sing a scale on whatever do. But if you need to know where your do is, if you need to know that it's an A, that might help you. But when you look at the scale written on the page and see that it's written in the key of C, I think you're going to wrap yourself into knots. Really do it a cappella, I think, and just pick a do that's comfortable for you and then sing from there. Yes, Tom. Tom, you're muted, I believe.
Okay, is that all right?
There we go.
There seem to be two basic things that you talked about earlier, pitch and also the solfege. And they're kind of connected together. And I'm just first, it's a question about people, the students you run across. People can do solfege naturally quicker than they can do pitch. Is that correct?
There are some students that start singing solfege syllables correctly before they start singing correct notes. That is very true. Think of solfege syllables as labels for notes that you hear. They label things according to their identity within a scale. And so in terms of singing correct pitch, if you're singing in tune or not, that's the idea of pitch in that sense. There are plenty of people, all of us sing out of tune at one point or another, you know what I mean? But we still can use solfege to hear where we should be. Now, my high school students that I taught the last 2 years, there was a few of them that never sang a wrong note the entire time, but they could absolutely understand that a note was 5 notes above the root of that key. And so they could tell that a G would have been so in the key of C. And that kind of understanding is just as important as an innate sense of pitch. But the ones help the other. So people who have good pitch help the people who are just better with solfege sing in tune, and the people with good, strong solfege help the people with good pitch sing the correct solfege syllable. So at the end of the day, we all kind of come out together. Now, of course, without us being able to sit in the same room and sing together, we can cry over that for the, until we can get back in the room. But I wish you had that kind of help. Maybe what I can do is, in addition to some of the exercises I want you to decode for yourself, I can send you a video with some solfege patterns and sing them with you. And maybe I'll have Hannah record some for high voice people, and I'll record some for low voice people. And that way you can sing with us and practice some of these patterns. Music is very much a vocabulary. Just like when we're learning an instrument, we learn scales. If you can play scale and arpeggio in every key, then you've basically learned all of the requisite parts of any music you'll play, any kind of standard music you play. Learning patterns in solfege is the same way. If you can learn to sing scales and arpeggios and little fragments of scales and arpeggios, so little skips and little stepwise things, then when you put it all together, singing a piece of music, you've already sung it all before. That's the real application of this concept of solfege, is that you can learn a vocabulary of music so that when you go and you're reading a score, you already know the alphabet and the syntax of that language before you get into the middle of it and are trying to, read it from scratch. Doing this kind of thing is like on Duolingo when, you're just learning little bitty nonsense phrases of things just to learn parts of speech and to start building a basic vocabulary. And then, if I gave you a novel in Spanish and said, here, learn Spanish, that would be the wrong way to learn Spanish. Do we all agree with that? If I were to hand you a book in German and say, here's a book in German, learn it, and we're going to sing it next week, you'd be like, that's not, but we do that to people all the time, don't we? The necessity of choral singing involves doing that all the time, where I hand someone who just showed up to choir an octavo with music in it, and I say, here, we're going to do this, just stare at it till it stops moving. That's not the best way to learn, because there's all these symbols, and it's in weird keys, and there's key changes, and there's accidentals, and there's dynamics, and you have to sing the right words, and you have to sing together, and it has to be harmony with this part and that part. It's too much to do. Breaking pitch down into these little bitty little units, which is note, 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 and how they relate to each other using solfege, allows us, again, to learn a vocabulary so that when we get into a choral setting, you can hear that while the sopranos are singing so, la, do, 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 that you're going to sing a different part and you've already figured yours out. So by the time you get around to singing it the first time, you've already been hearing it in your head. If you can get to that point, you realize you're going to be unstoppable in a choral setting when you have friends singing with you. That's going to be amazing. So think of these things in these itty bitty little units, 3-note, 4-note long, and we'll record them and send you some practice ones. And then I want you to take, the 8 or 10 that I write for you out and use that to practice writing in the solfege syllables, all in the people's key of C major for right now. And then later I can throw some different keys at you and you can learn what key signatures are and what they tell us. That's for next time. How's that sound? Who's overwhelmed? Who's like, bro, I don't know what, hello? Okay, so we're none of us are at that level. Sandy, you're muted, Sandy, unmute yourself.
Give a brief explanation of atonal music, because it sounded really strange to me, what I've heard, and I don't see the point of it, so.
Yeah, so in brief, all sound exists at its fundamental, and also it produces overtones. So strings, if on a guitar you pluck a string, the string not only vibrates in its totality, but it vibrates in half, it vibrates at a third, it vibrates at a fifth, and it creates overtones. And the overtones and their relationship to the fundamental pitch is why things sound the way they do. So if I take this can of Coke Zero here, and I tap it, there's the fundamental sound of the tap, and then there's the way the sound rings through the can. That ring is overtones. So tonal music that we sing, that we're talking about right now in our discussion about solfege, depends upon there being this fundamental pitch, this home pitch that everything else relates to via overtones. Music for 1900 years and before that was naturally this way, because if you took a bowstring on someone's bow and arrow and plucked it, you got exactly those kind of overtones in that bowstring, which later became an instrument like a harp, right? But as we entered the 20th century, composers, for a myriad of interesting and wonderful reasons, wanted to explore writing music that deliberately did not prioritize any pitch over the other. And so they came up with what ended up being 12-tone music. So they said, look, there's 12 keys in each, there's 12 notes in each octave. And so I'm going to write music that never makes our ear think, bum, ba-da-da-da-dee, bum, bum. They wanted to avoid that sense of finality in their music. And so they deliberately wrote music that clashed consistently and never took us home to do. And for really good reasons. And it's not music that a lot of people enjoy, but, you know, because it's not like Beethoven or Mozart where you can just live in this music and it carries you along. But it does serve a purpose of pointing out how important it is that notes relate to each other and whatever. I mean, there's lots of conclusions you can draw from that. But there's been a lot of atonal music composed in the last 100 years, and some of it is very, very interesting, and other things are not. But that's what it's really about, is just avoiding the hierarchy of pitch relationships that is essential to most music would make.